In this video, we are going to talk about the top 5 AWS or cloud computing interview questions. These are not specific to any service. So these are scenario-based questions which are almost asked in all of the interview rounds for cloud computing. I have categorized them into 5 parts. They are all scenario based, and you would find a relevance of these questions in almost all of your interview rounds for cloud computing, specifically for AWS. The only prerequisite that you need to have is that you have fundamental understanding of 3 sets of services: the compute services, the storage services, and the network services. So irrespective of which role you are applying for, cloud computing is needed almost in all the roles in IT today. For developers, for QAs, for operation engineers, network engineers, DevOps engineers, it is a must-have skill to possess. So let's get started and try to understand what these questions are and how to answer them. To understand the prerequisite, I have divided the set of services into 3 categories. Now within these individual categories, there are multiple services, and it's humanly not possible for one to know all of these services. So just to have a basic understanding of what compute services does with respect to servers, VMs, how you can use EC2 machines, or how you can use container services, Lambda, etc., is enough as a prerequisite. Then with respect to storage, now these compute services, they need to persist some kind of data within themselves, right? They need to have some kind of a volume attached. So that is where storage comes into the picture, and you need to understand what is file system storage, what is an object storage, what are databases. This is prerequisite for the storage services. And then you have network services. Whatever you are hosting in the compute server, whatever you are hosting here, end user has to access them, right? So the end user will only be able to access them when you provide the routing functionality to the application, and that is where these set of services which are within the network peripherals come into the picture. So you need to understand how the flow of traffic happens within your cluster, and basically you don't go too much deep into network part if you are not into DevOps or if you are not into SRE. This is mostly discussed in operational roles, the roles which require you to do a lot of network debugging. So if you're a developer or a QA engineer, then you can just have a very minimal understanding of how the flow of traffic is happening within your network. So the first question is very straightforward. The interviewer will ask you to explain your project, your environment. Most likely your environment is going to build on top of this very basic infrastructural definition. So this is the basic architectural diagram of any environment that you can think of. If you are not aware of what is the pictorial representation of components within your environment, then just memorize this image and try to understand what are the different components that I have highlighted here. Your application would be hosted somewhere here within the compute services, EC2s. So there will be applications running inside these EC2s, and they will be accessed by the end user via Route 53. There can be a use case where you have certain EC2s present within the public subnet and some of them within the private subnet. So you need to understand what is the difference between a public subnet and a private subnet. Public subnet is the one which has direct connectivity to internet, and from outside of the network you can access this. Private is something that is private to your cluster, to your VPC, and only the other subnets present within, or the other infrastructural components present within the VPC, have the access to these subnets. So ideal candidates for them are your databases, or your applications, or the machines which host the applications that talk directly to the databases. If, for example, you have front-end machines or front-end applications that are present here, and then you have the other set of applications which are hosted in these EC2 machines, which are hosting your middle layer or your application interface layer. So your front-end layer can talk to these because they are all within the same VPC, and they can then internally talk to the RDS and the instances that are in the private subnet, and then give it back to the instances that are in the public subnet, and eventually the user gets it. Topics that you should discuss with this with respect to this question. One is, what is your application doing, or what is the purpose of your application? Second, how do you break your application if it's a microservice application or if it's a monolith application? You should talk about auto scaling group, how you are managing the scaling within your environment. And you should also talk about user data. So whenever a new machine comes up, whenever a new instance comes up, what kind of user data are you putting it by default within this application? If possible, use a whiteboard, draw this picture, make them understand that you have this kind of an infrastructure, and on top of this, for the next questions, you keep on building, or you keep on following up. So the first question is common to developers, to DevOps engineers, to operational engineers, basically for everyone to explain their project or their environment. The second question is specifically asked to operational and DevOps engineers. So in this question, you will be asked, how is the environment created, maintained, and monitored? Now, most likely your environment will be created with the help of Terraform or any infrastructure as a code vendor provider. Different tools are present in the market today, but stick to Terraform if Terraform is what you are using. If you are not using Terraform, CloudFront is what you're using, then stick to that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, don't give an answer that you're not comfortable with. However your infrastructure is created, please be honest with that. Almost 80 to 90% of times the infrastructure is created by Terraform in the modern times. Again, there might be instances where the environment was created entirely by a different team and not by you, and you are just using this environment. So be open about it. Just say that the environment was not created by me, and there is also a possibility that the environment was created not in a planned manner. What I mean to say is that you created certain components with the help of infrastructure as code, and then certain components you build on top of it using the UI interface. So you can again say the same thing. There are follow-up questions which would be asked based on the answer that you give for this question, but generally the answer to this question is infrastructure as code, any tool that you have used. Don't say that you are using configuration manager for creating the infrastructure or creating the environment. So that's a red signal. Try to avoid configuration managers in this question. Now let's look at the fourth question before we look at the third one, because fourth question is directly depending on the answer that you give on the second one. So if your infrastructure was created by using something like a Terraform or a CloudFormation or some other tool like that, then your state management becomes a crucial aspect of your operational activities. Again, this is not a question for developers and QA engineers. This is a question for DevOps engineers. Here you should explain how your operational team or your DevOps team is taking care of managing the state of the infrastructure. Now, this is crucial when we want to understand how reliable the environment is. So say for example, there is a bug that has been introduced with any of the infrastructural changes that we did. We created a load balancer, but the target group for that load balancer was not configured properly, and we want to revert back to the last known state. If you are not using any state management tool, then this is a very difficult task to achieve. It's more likely you will be doing hit and run, and you will be trying to understand what all changes you did. So it's always a good practice to use infrastructure as code, so that you can always go back to the previous version of known stable infrastructure or environment state and get back your environment into working condition as soon as possible. However, this question is not relevant for you if you are not the one who is managing the operations on this environment, and you can right away say that this is being taken care by the operation or SRE or DevOps team. Okay, let's go back for the third question now. What is done for the hardening of the environment? Okay, so first question, you explained what is your project, how does your project look like. In the second question, you explained or the interviewer will ask you how you are creating and maintaining and monitoring your infrastructure. Uh, Monitoring is a part that is also going to be discussed in length here, so we'll take it in the last part. So basically, the interviewer is trying to understand if you have the complete understanding of the flow of information, the flow of access to your environment. Now, what does that mean? There are two kind of users, human users, that will interact with your environment. One set of users, you can call them end users, or you can call them application users. Second user or second set of users, those are the system users. You can call them developers, QA engineers, DevOps engineers, operational engineers, auditors, and SRE engineers. Now, both of these set of users need to access your environment, but both of them have a very different purpose. The first set of user, or the application or the app users, they will interact with your application via Route 53. So this is a DNS or a domain name server or an endpoint which will be accessed by the user, maybe via their mobile application or via browser. And this comes from internet. They access the Route 53. In Route 53, what you have is multiple components present within something called a hosted zone. So in this hosted zone, this is where you define certain records, and you have records which are called A names, and within these A names you have references of load balancers. So basically within these load balancers you have the references. So these load balancers, or there will be only one load balancer that will be pointing to the target groups, and those target groups will be pointing to either these EC2s which are present within this private subnet, or this can point to, or you can have load balancer that can point to other EC2s. Your end user is not interested in knowing the routing or knowing how the traffic is going from Route 53 to the load balancer, from load balancer to the load balancer target groups, and then to rules and EC2s. All he needs is the access to this end application. So this application is what is serving him the purpose, and this is the first set of informational flow, or the user that is interacting with your system. Now let me change the color of this one. The second set of user, this is the system users, or the people who are responsible for using and managing this environment. They will also access just like the end user, but they will have a different purpose to access. They are the ones who will navigate within the public subnets, within the private subnets. They are ones who will be doing the debugging and all of that information. So they generally access the environment via something called a Bastion server, or you can call it a jump host. If you're not aware of what these Bastion servers and jump hosts are, please have a look at them. That's a very good interview topic for cloud computing. So these users, they navigate to the jump host or the Bastion servers, and from the Bastion servers they navigate to the different components of the environment. They can go to these EC2 machines. From these EC2 machines they can navigate to the RDSs, or from these they can also go to other components. So this is a high level overview of the two type of users that you have. These are human users. There is a third actor as well, and that is generally it's a Jenkins server. So this is the server that is responsible for doing CI and CD, or continuous integration and continuous deployment of your application and infra code on this environment. So it can be Jenkins for this example's sake. Now, what the question asks you is, how are you making sure that you are hardening your environment? How are you making sure that this user, developer, QA, and DevOps or operation personnel is managed, monitored within this environment? Or if this is Jenkins, then what are the SVC or service accounts or the users that are able to log in and able to push the changes? Changes can be with respect to your infrastructural code or with respect to your application code. A very important question. So if you are a developer, you would be asked again, how are you accessing your environment and how are you deploying your code there. If you are a DevOps engineer, you would be asked, how are you accessing the environment, how are you deploying the infrastructural changes there, and how are you configuring the servers like Jenkins and making these infrastructural changes or application changes happen or deploy in an automated way. Hardening is a security related question, but it is also something that is asked to developers and DevOps engineers and to QA engineers. And it's a good interview topic. Spend some time, try to understand where all you have restrictions, security policies within your environment. You can define three basic places where that happens. One is at this level, at the bastion level. So only the known users or the users which are within the VPC of or VPN of your company, of your organization, can have access to this bastion. And within this bastion, then you can manage who are the users who have access to maybe to the public subnet or to the private subnet, depending upon what kind of IP whitelisting is happening. And then also with respect to Jenkins, you can have these users and service accounts created, and only specific people can execute the deployment tasks. So that is what would be discussed in the hardening round of or the hardening question. Now for the fifth question, there is a misconception that log management monitoring is only related to DevOps and only they need to know it, which is absolutely wrong. QA engineers, developers spend much more time in understanding and navigating into log systems and monitoring systems than actual DevOps engineers. So try to understand what kind of logging engines are integrated within your infrastructure. In this case, you can say that you have CloudWatch enabled, which is the simplest form of logging, or you can say that your EC2 logs are getting pumped and pushed to some kind of a log management system. You can also, if you're using compute services like Kubernetes and Docker, you can have Fluent Bit and Fluent Daemon pumping these logs and sending to a display engine like a Graylog. So this is specific to what kind of an environment you have, but generally the best answer to give is that your logs are present within CloudWatch, and you get alerting and monitoring based on the rules that you have created, maybe in engines like Prometheus, in Ops Genie. But those are something which are related to operating and monitoring team, or maybe they are present in the EC2 and you have some kind of a cron job running which fetches these logs and sends to S3 based on the indexing that you have configured. One important aspect here with respect to this question is to understand that your developers will be looking for application logs, your QA engineers will be looking for application logs. However, your operations, SREs, administrators, or DevOps engineers, they would be looking also on infrastructural logs. So these are two different kind of logs: infrastructure logs, application logs, and you need to segregate or you need to answer in such a way that the interview understands that you are aware of which logs are going where, how are they getting indexed, and how are you making sense of that much of data. So these are the 5 most commonly asked interview questions for cloud computing. On top of this, if you are going for specific role, say for example, if you're going for security or administration role, then make sure that you touch base with the security services that the vendors provide, the IAMs, the WAFs, the shields. But those are very role driven interview questions. These 5s are very generic questions, and they are asked irrespective of which role or whatever role you are going to be interviewed for. So that was all for this video. Hope you found it informative, and I'll see you in the next one.